thank you everybody for coming to today's webinar, Local Policy Making in New York State. We have a lot of great presenters and we're excited to hopefully give you some helpful information here. So here are the people who will be presenting today. Ken Dahlgren has enjoyed a career in public health for the last 25 years, with most of his time concentrated in advocacy around commercial tobacco control and tobacco-free policy. Currently, he is a community engagement coordinator for tobacco-free Chautauqua, Cattaraugus, and Allegheny counties in Western New York, employed by Roswell Park Comprehensive Cancer Institute. He has served as a member of the Town of Carroll Board for 20 years and serves on the Chautauqua County Board of Health. He has also served as a Chautauqua County legislator. Dana Bushy Isabella has worked in the tobacco control community in New York State since 2001, first as a program coordinator for Reality Check, and now as the program director for tobacco-free Clinton, Franklin, Essex, and Reality Check. Utilizing a community transformation model, tobacco-free CFE and Reality Check empower communities to create healthier places to live, work, and play through policy development. From tobacco-free outdoors to smoke-free housing to the retail environment, they are working toward building a tobacco-free generation. Dana also serves as an elected town councilor for the town of Plattsburgh in Clinton County, New York. Mike Seilback serves as the Assistant Vice President, Nationwide Advocacy, State Public Policy for the American Lung Association. He's responsible for managing the organization's nationwide state and local advocacy team and providing leadership on the state and local advocacy agenda. He also serves as the advocacy lead in New Jersey and downstate New York. And I'm Mike Freiberg, a senior staff attorney with the Public Health Law Center. The Public Health Law Center is located at Mitchell-Hamlin School of Law in St. Paul. We're a dedicated team of attorneys, policy analysts, and support staff who work nationwide on public health policies in the areas of commercial tobacco control, healthy eating, active living, and health equity. The Public Health Law Center is located at Mitchell-Hamlin School of Law in St. Paul, Minnesota. We acknowledge our presence in the tribal and treaty homelands of the Dakota Oyate since time immemorial. These lands are home to the Sisseton, Wahpeton, Mdewakanton, and Wapakute Dakota peoples. This land acknowledgement was developed by the Native American Law and Sovereignty Institute at Mitchell-Hamlin School of Law and is being used here with permission. For more information on the indigenous peoples in these tribal lands, we encourage you to visit the URL on the slide, and these slides will be made available. So we'll be talking about commercial tobacco products today. And I just want to emphasize that when we talk about regulating tobacco products, we're talking about regulating commercial tobacco products. There's a rich history of sacred tobacco use among indigenous peoples in the United States. So we want to make it clear when we're working, especially with these advocates, that we respect traditional tobacco. So we want to avoid using expressions, kind of overly broad expressions like tobacco is harmful, or that we are working for policies that make people free of tobacco. Here is a definition of commercial tobacco that can be used in a policy, just to make it clear. Actually, this is the definition of traditional tobacco, so you can make it clear that you're not regulating traditional tobacco products as part of a policy. So at the Public Health Law Center, as I said, we work on commercial tobacco products. The way we do that is through providing legal technical assistance to advocates. And legal technical assistance is distinct from legal representation. So the type of information we provide can be legal research, talking about how policies have been handled in other states besides New York State. We can assist with policy development, implementation, and defense. We have lots of publications on various commercial tobacco control policies and topics related to it. Those can be found on our website, publichealthlawcenter.org. We provide trainings on commercial tobacco control topics, such as this one. Some of them are by webinar, some of them are in person. I'll be seeing many of you probably in Albany next week, and I'm looking forward to that. So the two things that legal technical assistance does not constitute, one is direct representation. The stuff I'll be talking about today shouldn't be considered legal advice. If you have a specific legal problem, you should contact an attorney who is licensed to represent you. And we also don't lobby legislators or elected officials. And at Public Health Law Center, we believe that effective policy is equitable policy, especially when it comes to public health, and especially when it comes to commercial tobacco control policy. We also believe that one-size policies do not fit all, especially in health. Our goal, and the goal of, I would think, all people in our field, is policy that improves the public health. And in order to do that, all groups affected must be considered, especially those who face inequality and oppression. Just to list an example, if you pass a law to restrict smoking in multi-unit housing, but criminalize smoking in those settings, that could have an inequitable result given issues with the criminal justice system. That's why when we work on smoke-free multi-unit housing policies, we focus on working with the tenant and the landlord and providing cessation and rather than criminal penalties. Some of you know this like the back of your hand, but a place to start to talk about health equity, or rather health inequity, is to talk about the social determinants of health. Healthy People 2020 defines the social determinants of health as conditions like social, economic, or physical conditions in the environment and settings like schools, neighborhoods, the region, the workplace, in which people live, learn, work, play, worship, and age, that affect a wide range of health, functioning, and quality of life outcomes and risks, as well as social engagement and sense of security. They also include racism, discrimination, and bias. Basically, the social determinants of health explain in part why some people are healthier than others and why some people generally are not as healthy as they could be. So that's kind of just some general background into the Public Health Law Center and what we do. Here's what we're going to be talking about today. I'll be just briefly presenting some basics of local government policy in New York State. Ken Dahlgren is going to give a kind of a run through of passing a local law. Dana Isabella will be talking about how to engage with local government, and Mike Seilback will be talking about working with advocates, and then there should be some time for Q&A at the end. So to start with, local units of government are fortunate in New York State, and then in that they likely have full authority to adopt tobacco control laws. So the statute you see here is the New York statute saying local units of government have authority to adopt smoke-free laws that are stronger than the state smoke-free law. There is no explicit grant of authority like this for local units of government in New York State to adopt regulations related to the sale of tobacco products, but they likely have this authority because of the inherent powers of local governments in New York State and the lack of any preemptive language in state law. So preemption is sort of a legal concept that says a higher level of government, like say the federal government, if it wants to, can prevent a lower level of government like state or local governments from adopting a regulation in that area. Like I said, we're fortunate in New York State that there is no preemption of local policies in the smoke-free or likely in the context of tobacco product sales. New York is a home rule state in which local units of government are generally able to manage their own affairs as they see fit, barring any limits set by the legislature or by the state constitution. So what are local governments in New York State? These are the types of local governments that you will find. So there's counties, cities, towns, villages, and local boards of health. There is some variation within those types of governments. For example, counties may be run by a county legislature or by a board of supervisors. In New York State, local health departments may also play a role in policymaking that is relevant to commercial tobacco control advocates. There are 57 county health departments and the New York City Department of Health and Mental Hygiene, which provide public health services and regulation at the local level. Local policies may at times overlap and conflict with each other in a confusing way. So for example, both a county and a city within that county may have laws in place that license tobacco retailers. In such a situation, it's likely that the city law would apply within the city's boundaries. So when local governments are working on policy, what types of policies can they work on? In New York State, different types of local governments adopt legislation through different means. So for example, cities can adopt legislation through the three types of policies you see here, resolutions, ordinances, and local laws. In contrast, villages in New York State can adopt legislation only by resolution or local law. Now, just to give a little more background on these, resolutions are the least formal of the three types of local legislation. Local governments may adopt resolutions without any waiting period and without holding a public hearing. Matters affecting the day-to-day governance of a city are typically the subject of resolutions. So this might include a resolution establishing salaries or a resolution honoring a notable city resident. Ordinances are local legislation of intermediate formality. They are used for actions of more permanent nature, such as the establishment of a housing code. New York State statutes contain no general guidelines for adopting ordinances, so the process varies from city to city. Local laws are the most, whoops, sorry about that. Local laws are the most formal type of local legislation and are authorized by the New York State Constitution. Actions appropriate for a local law include matters related to the structure of government or relevant in the commercial tobacco control context, a regulation that can impose a criminal or civil penalty. The procedure for adopting a local law is spelled out in state statute. Local laws must include a title, an enacting clause, the body of the law, and an effective date. All local laws are filed with the New York Department of State. And the way these types of laws get adopted is through meetings, often with public hearings as well. So New York State statute defines a meeting as the official convening of a public body for purpose of conducting public business. Every meeting must be open to the public except for executive sessions to discuss issues such as pending legislation against a local government. Many statutes require the elected body of a local government to hold a public hearing before taking specific actions, such as the adoption of a local law. While there's little guidance as to what a public hearing is or how to conduct one, public bodies can limit comments to the topic of the hearing and can impose reasonable time limits. Public hearings are an important opportunity for commercial tobacco control advocates to make their views known on local policies. Before engaging in these activities, you should be aware of any lobbying restrictions in place. Lobbying can be restricted among certain professions, such as government employees or as part of funding contracts. Lobbying activities are restricted in many government funding contracts, such as the Advancing Tobacco-Free Communities grants made by the New York State Department of Health. But you should note that providing general information or data on the harms of commercial tobacco products is not the same thing as lobbying. So here is our contact information. I'll post my direct email address in the chat as well. But at this point, I would like to turn it over to Ken Dahlgren, and I will stop sharing my screen.
Thank you. Thank you, Mike. Some of what I'll be discussing about the passing of a local law is based on some discussions that have been had over the last couple of years where there have been a lot of questions, especially from new coordinators, about the process and a lot of confusion because different towns seem to do things differently. Different bodies, municipal bodies seem to do things differently. There really is a pattern, and by law, there is a specific way things need to happen when a local law passes, and Mike actually has gone over a little bit of it. I will walk us through an actual law that was passed in our local town. I do need to mention that there is one difference that's very important to understand between a town government and some of the other forms of government, in that the role of the executive. In town government, it's often just a town supervisor. The town supervisor is merely a member of the board that has fiscal responsibility, has been elected as a supervisor, but they are not the person who ratifies or vetoes a law at the end of the day. And that is very different from, say, county government or even city government. So that's important to know. And it does affect the way public hearings are scheduled. Public hearings are scheduled in a different way for county and city government than they may be for town government. And I think that's led to a lot of confusion. With town government, the public hearing is conducted before action is taken upon the law that's being considered. You have the public input, and then the board as a whole, takes action upon it. Now, it's different for county government and for city government often because the public hearing doesn't necessarily have to be held until their action is taken and before the executive signs off on it. The executive will call a public hearing where he or she gets the feedback from the public before they either approve or veto that particular law. So you will see some differences in how public hearings are used, but as we'll just kind of walk through what happened. So when we were looking at a comprehensive smoke-free law for all town properties in the town of Carroll in Western New York, it started with a presentation that was made to a local government class in the high school. They were looking for projects to get around behind. They asked me to come in. I periodically would talk to them and discuss some of the issues and the issue of smoke-free environment in our parks and playgrounds and outside of our town halls, and all municipal owned property came up. And that group of students decided to take that on as a project. So the first thing that happens is a complaint or a problem is the board is made aware of a complaint or a problem. And it might be um, someone like us coming in to do a presentation. To me, I find the most effective way is not for me to come in to do a presentation, even in my own town or another neighboring town, but to find a local champion who can actually speak on behalf of the other citizens. And then you be there as a supportive role. So I did that. I worked with the students. They came in, they did the presentation. And of course, who can resist a bunch of students coming into your town board meeting saying, please, please, this is something we'd like you to consider. So then, as Mike mentioned, the problem is brought to the board. The board says, oh yeah, this is okay. We should look into this. Let's give this information to the town attorney. Our town attorney will look it over. In this case, they actually had drafted a law based on some of the samples that were out there. And that's what was presented. The town attorney looked at it to make sure that it, met the requirements, and then gave it to the board. And as Mike said, you have a title, which is really just what the law is about, the enacting clause, which is basically saying be enacted by the town board of Carroll as follows, and the body, which gives all the objectives and how what needs to be accomplished is supposed to be accomplished, and then the effective date. And that date can be a tricky thing. We'll talk about it a little bit later, but and it needs to be a properly calculated date based on things that can happen. The law is then presented to the governing body. It's introduced by one of the members. It's put on the desk, so to speak, of the members. And it's important to know when that happens because there's time frames involved in that. Generally you need to have it on their desk at least for a week. In some cases, if it's mailed to the people instead of put on their desk officially, it's a 10-day thing, and Sundays don't count, which is something I think a lot of people don't realize. So once there's been proper notification, and there are many boards that will ignore some of this date stuff, and that can be really, really important. They want to get something through in a hurry, and they kind of ignore the rules. Now, some towns may have already passed a local law which allows them to set a notice period of as little as 3 days, and I think that's important to know. Those towns that have done that, that's 3 days after a public hearing, before something can be voted on. But generally, it has to be 5 days. So they've received the law. Public hearing is set. Proper notice is given. There has to be at least 5 days from the notice of the public hearing to the actual public hearing itself, or in some cases 3 days if the municipality has already done that. The public hearing is held. You have the right to go to the public hearings. Now, some towns require you to sign up in advance. Some towns allow for comment, at the meeting, but you have that opportunity. Again, it's better that if the comments come from citizens who live in that town, but if no one else is there, obviously, you can have your 2 cents and kind of give the education without lobbying, but basically give some of the education behind the issue. It's held, and if no changes are made, the municipal body can move to adopt it. If enough time has passed between the receiving the law, setting the public hearing, having the public hearing, many times we will have a public hearing set at like we'll have a town board meeting start at 6:30. We will set a public hearing for 7 o'clock. We will adjourn our regular meeting, go into the public hearing, discuss the issue, adjourn that, go back to our regular meeting, and then vote upon that particular law. That can happen if the time frame is right. Other times it may be the vote may be delayed to a future meeting. It doesn't have to be after the public hearing. It doesn't have to be voted on immediately. In fact, sometimes it can't be. It has to wait a little bit longer. Um, if it's passed and adopted, basically it's ready to be filed. The clerk has to, properly put it together, notarize it, file it on special letterhead, on special forms to the Department of State. The Department of State then receives it, and they have to actually look it over, make sure that it complies with New York State law. It can sometimes be sent back. We have had them sent back because there have been minor errors. Sometimes they'll just email and contact the clerk and say, hey, listen, you've got the wrong number here. This has got to be fixed. We're not going to file it until it's fixed. Once everything's in order, it's referred to the Secretary of State. They officially file it, and it becomes part of state record. So, it's a fairly straightforward process, but there's a lot of little things. There are some local laws that are subject to referendum. Generally, these are not, but what that means is if that happens, citizens can file petition on a local law to force it to actually go to a public vote referendum at the next available election. That doesn't generally happen, but there's a lot of time frames involved in that. And if you are passing a local law that could be subject to referendum, the date that's put in the effective date of the law is very important. Generally what we do is put like a date of 30 days or 60 days from final approval or whatever, in order to keep it safe. So, I mean, that's basically walking through a law, kind of boring kind of stuff, but it's important to understand the steps, I think. And hopefully I was clear. If you got questions, I can answer them. And I've had to do this at both the county and the town level. And yes, there are some differences, and that's why I needed to point those out.
Thank you, Ken. Dana, would you like to talk?
Sure. So, hi, everybody. I'm here today to talk about municipal engagement. So, Ken already went over the structure of a town government, town board with the supervisor and counselors. There's always a counselor also who is the deputy supervisor, who has that role and responsibility for that supervisor when they are away and out of town. So I think, and also I wanted to make sure, and he kind of hit on this also, to remember that the structure of each level of government, whether it is town or city or county, and village, are all a little different, and they have different guiding principles. We have a book that we follow to make sure that we are always at the town level in compliance with the rules and laws that are set forth by New York State. So as far as engagement goes, I know I've been saying this a lot lately to all of you, but I want you to remember that your elected officials are just normal people. They are people obviously, just like Ken and I, you and I, who have decided to somewhere along the line or been asked somewhere along the line to get involved with public service. And usually we come from all kinds of different backgrounds. So getting to know your elected officials is really important when you are looking to engage with them around policy or change happening in their area. So I wanted to state that, you have some resources that are available to you also to pay attention to. Like, I would say, department heads, utilizing your department heads is really important. So for instance, in the town of Plattsburgh, we have a planning and community development department, and we have codes and zoning, and each of those has a department head. And so if you're looking at codes and zoning or planning and something that's involved with, and actually those have a lot of overlap, get to know those department heads, even go in and have a talk with them, find out what their jobs are like. Like, for instance, our codes and zoning department is overwhelmed all the time. So the thought of changing codes or adding codes or looking at zoning that isn't in line with when they're doing it like every 5, 10, 20 years. And that's also recognizing that some municipalities, I have a municipality that has not changed their codes and zoning, or their zoning in particular, since the 70s. So when we talk to them about zoning, that's not anything that they really are engaged in, because they're just floating along with the current zoning. Codes are really set more at the state level, and then you do have some local codes that you can pass and put in, and structure. But they really are looking at a lot of the codes at the state level. So planning and community development, codes and zoning, get to know those departments. Those are probably, for the work that we do, the ones that are the most relevant. I would also have to say, you get to know your counselors, get to know those departments. There's an administrative assistant usually to your supervisor. He or she they are the gateway, the key holder usually to getting in somewhere. And actually they have that, and the clerk, they have the answers to almost everything. The clerks really have their hand in everything at the town level. So understanding that you have those people as resources, also paying really close attention to their websites. There's also at the town level, there's the Association of Towns, which is the state association of towns. Lots of info on that website. That's where most towns go for guidance, for training. They are the people that we look to at the state level. They also have, the AOT has its own legislative slate of what they're pushing forward through topics in the legislature. So getting to know like what the AOT, and I know that the county and cities also have associations also. Follow your town's YouTube, town, city, village, whatever. Follow their YouTube. Watch their codes and zoning and planning meetings. Also recognizing that planning and zoning boards are volunteer boards of constituents. And they are supposed to work somewhat independently from your elected officials. So like, I don't go to those meetings, but I do watch them on YouTube. Also letting you know, I know our structure for the town is each of our counselors is liaison to 6 departments. So I am a liaison to highway, parks and rec, planning, codes and zoning, assessing, and the court. And then there's also, I have another counselor that is with me also as a liaison to those 6. And then there's other departments. Oh, I do buildings and grounds also. And then I think one of the only ones I don't do is water. But there's probably something else. There's a lot of other departments I don't do. But anyway, so how do you engage with these people? I think part of it is to be present, to be active, show up at open comment times. Now, open comment, and that's also getting to know, like Ken mentioned, that their public hearings tend to, like he used the example of meeting starts at 6 and they will have their public hearing at 7. Know how your whatever board you're going in front of, how they usually do their work. Many, like we do our public comment time at the beginning of the meeting. The city does theirs at the end of the meeting. So kind of know how they do it. Usually you have 3 minutes. Sometimes some groups give 5. But don't be afraid to just show up and introduce yourself. Don't be afraid to be there regularly. Rotate it between you and other team members. Rotate your involvement, going and sitting and listening and watching. Be present. I think one of the things that I've been most surprised at as a town councilor is the lack of engagement from constituents. They're usually only there when they're upset about something. Not just there to be actively, and Ken has a totally different story. The people in his area are very actively involved. I could count on one hand in the last almost 4 years the number of times someone's just come in to make a public comment. So I definitely think utilizing public comment time, this is when you have everybody there and they're right in front of you. Keep that ongoing communication, writing, whether it's letters, emails. I will tell you that elected people, at least I've been trained by my supervisor, are very conscious of texting and emailing because of FOIL laws. So, if you really have something you want to say to them, yes, you can email them. But I would say put it in a letter. Do it snail mail way. Send it. We all have mailboxes at the office. And send us letters. Let us know what you're thinking. Like I said, I think there's a definite awareness of FOIL that makes people hesitant to respond to texts and emails. Ken mentioned earlier finding a champion. I think putting together a team of champions that are built of constituents and youth, could be professionals in the field. Also, you could have doctors or whoever, teachers, administrators, put together a team of champions so that you are there just supporting them. I wanted to mention a couple. I feel like I'm a little scattered, getting to the point I'm a little scattered. I wanted to mention some other resources. Your towns should have a comprehensive plan. Make sure to take a look at that comprehensive plan as well as their website to see kind of who they are and where they're going in the next 10 years. I know we do ours every 10 years. We've gotten into the habit, we are doing smart growth planning also. So we've kind of we're heading into a comprehensive plan soon, but we've in between been doing smart growth planning. The other resource that I have become very aware since I've been involved in my municipality is the engineering consultants. There's very little that we do at the town that we aren't hiring an engineering consultant of one kind or another. I mean, so like one of the ones that we use, we have 3 or 4, but Labella stands out to me, is one of our big engineering consultants. I met with their owner, just happened to bump into him in the hallway at the town last week when I was in signing vouchers. And, you know, I said, listen, I've been thinking about this. When we're working with municipalities across New York State in our work. You know, I've been thinking about zoning and licensing and these things. And should we be educating these engineering firms? Because they are the ones, honestly, that are kind of driving the plans for towns and cities and counties. They're hired to as the experts. And he said, absolutely. And so I think that's one of the things that I'll probably look at doing this year in particular. I'll start with Labella and work with them and just educating about who we are. And as tobacco-free CFE, as the Advancing Tobacco-Free Communities, these are people that really need to know the work we're doing. They are hired to do zoning. They're hired to do comprehensive plans. They're hired to create those plans with the town. So I don't know where along the way, I think it was just kind of took me a while to learn that, you know, really our municipality utilizes engineers on a regular basis to kind of drive the work we do. The last thing I wanted to say is that in my experience, there's a huge difference between working with a town or village than in a city than the county level. And even within the county, there's big differences depending on the structure. So I happen to live in my tri-county area. I have 2 boards of legislators. Franklin and Essex County both have legislative boards. That's a whole nother layer of government than Essex County as a board of supervisors. So that they've kind of eliminated a little bit of another layer by having the board of supervisors. There's 18 towns in Essex County. Each of those supervisors belongs to the board of supervisors that makes all the decisions for the county with the county executive. So it's really different working with our county legislatures as it is with our board of supervisors. Our county legislature tends to want to push everything down to the lower municipal level. The board of supervisors represents the lower municipal level. And so they really need to come together. What they work on is coming together collaboratively to make decisions that work for the majority of the county. Interestingly enough, though, with the board of supervisors, their votes are weighted by the population of their town. So, for instance, with 18 supervisors in Essex County, if we can get the top 4, the big 4, to vote for positively for us, it's a yes across for all. It goes for all 18. So that became that's really important when we're working on our local level work in Essex County, is really not to ignore the little ones. We want them because they also build coalitions. It's no different than even at the national level. They build coalitions, but it's important to understand and to know. So I guess what I'm saying is that none of this happened and I didn't learn any of this overnight. I learned it by being involved for years here, but also then taking that next step. I totally understand now more how to engage as an elected official, how to engage the ways that I was doing it previously. I don't think necessarily took into account what I know now. So with that being said, I'm going to pass it on to Mike Seilback there to share with us his experience from the advocate side.
Great. Thank you so much, Dana, Ken, Mike. So I wanted to kind of come at this from a slightly different angle, and that's working with all of you and working with local elected officials. And so where I want to start off is, sometimes the question is, well, who are the advocates? And so I'm going to somewhat self-servedly mention they may include the American Cancer Society Cancer Action Network, the American Heart Association, my organization, the American Lung Association, the Campaign for Tobacco-Free Kids. But it really doesn't stop there. In New York, there are a coalition of groups that have been fighting for tobacco control for decades now. And so I'm just going to name some of those because you may hear about them and there may be opportunities for you to work with them. So that could include the Medical Society of the State of New York, which sometimes is called MISNY, the American Academy of Pediatrics, which you might hear as AAP, Roswell Park, the New York State Nurses, NAACP, Center for Black Health and Equity, the PTA, NYPIRG. So there are a ton of advocates. And what does it mean to be an advocate? Well, it depends how and what we're talking about, because in a lot of ways, at different stages in our work, we can all be advocates. However, New York State has very strict laws about what is lobbying and what is education. And there was a question submitted that said, what happens if a grantee is talking about these very important issues, they're educating local bodies, and the legislator or the staff says, well, what do you want me to do about it? And there is a fine line there. You cannot be a funded staff member from the New York State Department of Health and lobby for laws. And so there are ways to continue your education, which answers the question, which is there are a multitude of policy options available for local elected officials. And we know that keeping the price of tobacco is important in making it harder to access tobacco is important. So you could say things like that. You should not say, what we need you to do is pass a law that does A, B, and C. The other thing that you can always do is hand it over to one of your advocates like me. So here in New York State, a few names of folks that you may have heard or may work with that include Brianna Raza at the Heart Association, formerly Durkee, Kevin O'Flaherty at Campaign for Tobacco-Free Kids, Mike Zavoli at ACS CAN, and myself, Mike Seilback. Some of these organizations also have other local staff that they might not be advocacy staff, but they might not be bound by the same lobbying laws. So if there is somebody in Western New York whose main job is to do fundraising or organize a walk, they might be permitted by their organization to represent their organization and make that ask in line with the advocacy priorities. It could, and you heard a little bit about this from Dana and Ken, it doesn't have to be paid advocacy staff. It could be local volunteers, patient advocates, moms, dads, students. As long as, and again, there are fine lines. When you're working with reality check children, there are some of those requirements about what they are and are not allowed to say does continue through. But there are ways that you are able to educate and work with advocates. And that's the important thing that I think we're really stressing here. So what can advocates do? So advocates could provide feedback and guidance to legislators and staff. They could talk about legislation. They could help raise visibility about these issues. They could energize the community. They could do media advocacy. I know all of you as part of, do you guys still use CAT? Um, there was something called CAT. I think you still might know of it. I'm not sure. I feel old. But that it is a tool where I know folks need to do media advocacy. They need to communicate with their local elected officials. But the advocates can also do that. The advocates can take it that next step further and say, we want the town council or the town board to pass a law to restrict the amount of retailers in our town. Advocates can testify. They can, without any restrictions, show up at a public hearing, at a committee hearing, at a vote, and ask legislators to do something. I assume within moments, I'm going to see a Q&A that says, well, I live in a town that is nowhere near where any of our advocates are. We've never seen one. We hear about them, but they've never stepped foot anywhere near our locality. And you might be 100% correct. But there are ways for advocates to do their jobs without setting foot. We can call, we could send emails, we could write letters. So the thing that I want to make sure that you all know is we are here to help. And the only way we can do that is being kept in the loop. So please, 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 if you are talking with local elected officials after you work with PHLC, pull in the advocates because they play a different role. The other thing I wanted to flag for all of you is that Dana mentioned elected officials are just like you, and she's exactly right. But the thing that I also want to remind you is that you are experts. You are experts in tobacco control. You know more than, insert percentage that I have no idea if it's accurate, but I'm willing to bet that you know more than 90-something% of New Yorkers on tobacco control, on public health, on public policy. And I think there's a lot of times that we forget and are anxious because the people that we're standing in front of feel like, they're higher than we are. And what Dana is trying to remind you, and I'm reminding you as well, is they're people. They started off just like us, and you are now an expert. And so use your expertise to educate and use your expertise to ask advocates for help. So with that, I am going to turn it back to Mike, and I think we're going to do a little Q&A.
Thanks, Mike, and thank you to all three of you. That was great information. There was the one question about lobbying that I said I'd wait until the Q&A, but then Mike went ahead and did a great job answering it. So I don't know if anyone has any follow-up on that, but it looks like there was another question that came in the Q&A. It says, what if a county adopts a law that affects each municipality within that county? For instance, a county adopts a tobacco retail license law. The law includes a provision that caps the number of places that can sell tobacco. Is each municipality in that county jurisdiction bound to the county law? We're actually doing some legal research into this question. We think the answer is generally the county law applies within that city unless the city has its own, say you're talking about a TRL, a tobacco retail license ordinance. So if both the city and the county have a law in place along those lines, then the city law would be the one that takes effect. But if there is none, then the county law would. But we're still looking into that. Do any of you have any additional comments on that through your experience? If not, that's fine.
I was just reading it last night in the New York State law, and there's a lot of back and forth over in this circumstance, this happens, this takes precedent, and this, so that it's spelled out in the town law or in the state law.
I'll also just say that oftentimes the smaller jurisdiction is the one that's going to act first and not vice versa. So the really confusing part is when there are two laws that are similar to each other but don't do exactly the same thing. And sometimes both laws could stay on the books if they're not doing exactly the same thing. So it really, to me, I'm not a lawyer or an elected official, but it does feel like a case by case basis in a lot of times.
And that's also why I said earlier that I think the county likes to push things down to the smaller municipal level because they do affect all the municipalities in one way or another. With that being said, I know our county is starting to think a little bit about retail licensing. And that makes sense because they have the environmental unit. And so it would be built in within the county environmental piece that oversees all of the retailers anyway. So, but I think most of the time you're going to find that the county, like there's a local group right now that wants a law made countywide about not tying your dogs out in bad weather. And they can't get the county to move at all on it. They keep pushing it down to the municipalities. That's just the nature of it, honestly.
And there was a comment from Stan Martin, I Stan, in the chat that says, not everyone understands preemption in New York State, but I think you're addressing it now. This isn't exactly an issue of preemption that we were discussing here. I talked about preemption a little bit in my comments, but I'll just mention again that preemption generally is when a higher level of government says that a lower level of government can't adopt a regulation in that area. And New York State is fortunate in that there is no preemption set by the state legislature of city, county, town, village type government. So when it comes to tobacco retailer licensing laws or smoke-free laws. So there are some states where the state legislature just explicitly says like no city or county can adopt anything stronger than state law when it comes to smoke-free laws or when it comes to regulating the sale of tobacco products. But again, New York State is not one of those states. So we're fortunate in that respect. There is a question that was submitted here by an anonymous attendee. It says, if I attend a town board public hearing on my own time, can I make a direct ask regarding a piece of legislation? This is on the premise that I'm grant funded through the state. I'm a little reluctant to answer that because I haven't read the exact language in your contract. Mike, I see you unmuted yourself there.
Yeah, I mean, just being completely honest, I'm glad this person is anonymous because it would appear that they were trying to go around the letter or the spirit of the law. That being said, all New Yorkers are allowed to express their opinions. But the thing that I try to remind all of our grantees, do you want a front page newspaper story in your jurisdiction that New York State funds X person's job and then they showed up and asked legislators to do something? So my short answer is you are absolutely allowed to use your voice and you should. But if you're doing it intentionally to skirt the law, the New York State lobbying, whatever its current name is well aware that that is a plausibility and has ruled, that there are lines there, and you can't just sort of cover your eyes and pretend it's not. So I'd say be careful and talk to your fiscal agent or whoever holds the contract, as well as advocates, and make sure you're not doing anything that would put, from a media perspective, that would be embarrassing for you, for the goals that you're trying to reach, and your employer.
Thanks. That's great advice. I don't see any additional questions. Maybe I'll just give like 10 or 20 seconds for people to post it in the chat or the Q&A. But otherwise we can just end a few minutes early here. I don't know, Ken, Mike, Dana, any any thoughts on those, any of the questions you didn't get an opportunity to say?
I would just encourage you all to get more involved with your own local community. Public service is probably one of the best gifts you can give back to your community. And I'm a little discouraged, honestly, at how difficult it is to get people involved. So you can even volunteer on one of those boards that are volunteer boards if that's what you want to do, but get involved, get to know your people.
And I think more importantly, if you have children in your life or people you're responsible for, teach them the importance. Teach them how important it is to you and get them involved at an early age, because not enough of that is happening.
And I'll just add that, I think a lot of this work on the local level feels overwhelming. And, you could hear just in this conversation, there's not two town boards that operate exactly the same way, whether we're talking about committee hearings or, they're all different. There's times that you're asked to testify around a table. There's other times that you're standing at a podium. Find out, go to one of these meetings when it's not your issue. Just observe, see who the vocal people are. Is there someone that's talking about issues that somehow are related to the issues we care about? And put that aside. Just know that this person is doing this thing and they look approachable. That's step one. Don't wait until you're responding to the news story that says somebody's doing something. Start that early and just observe. I find going to county legislatures and sitting in the back and just paying attention is really helpful.
Yeah,
And
thank you.
Thank you.
Dana, you're muted.
I'd like to mention one more thing. Most committee meetings, like at our county level, all that's done at the county meetings is they vote. That's it. They don't even read what they're voting on. They've already discussed it in committee meetings. Those committee meetings are open and should be publicized to all of you. So I know for me, I have a liaison meeting on the 7th and I have to have that posted 3 days in advance. So attend some of those committees, especially the health committees. Ken talked about health committee. Attend some of those committee meetings also.
All right, well, thank you. This has been great. I really appreciate you, all three of you, offering your expertise. Anyone, please feel free to reach out to any of us if you have any questions, and thank you for your time. With that, I will end this webinar.